welcome to segment 3 of Citizens Forum. I'd like to start by thanking again our volunteer crew and the Shaw staff that makes the program happen. This is being filmed on Tuesday, July the 14th. In this segment, we're going to be talking about a very important issue close to the neighborhood where I live. Our guest, we'll have two guests. The first guest is Al Gallup, and we're talking about the St. Andrews development proposal made by the development company Bosa to Victoria City Council, and it's sort of moving ahead and things are coming to a boil perhaps soon. So Al, thanks for coming on. And maybe you can just start by trying to make a picture for people where this exact development is.
Yeah, so this development is on the St. Andrews School site, which is about a half a block sized development site, or site right now, that occupies actually two lots, and it's on the corner of Pandora and Vancouver Street. And so the school has moved, and they want to sell the site, and this Vancouver developer, Bosa, has an offer to develop the site should they get the rezoning through.
Okay, so it's on the corner of Pandora and Vancouver.
Pandora and Vancouver.
The old Catholic school.
That's right.
And if you are coming down Pandora and you look north, you're going to see it.
Yes, that's right. Yes. And the other street that will also border on it is Mason Street, which is a small little one-way street that is favored by many people as a walking, biking street. And that street is on the north side of the development.
Right. So here's the development. Pandora is here, and
yes.
Mason is here.
That's right.
Are the North Park Neighbouhood Association, have the North Park Neighbourhood Association made a decision on Bosa's proposal?
Yes, the North Park Neighbourhood Association has had many discussions about this development. They've consistently asked for changes, significant changes to the development. And most recently, there was a public forum that the North Park Neighbourhood Association gave lots of notice for all the members of the community to come out. It was a well-attended meeting, and that was to inform the North Park Neighbourhood Association of what their position would be on this development, finally, to see if their position still held. And the results of that were that the North Park Neighbourhood Association has decided, because of the unanimous voice of those who attended that meeting, requesting council to reject the proposal.
Okay, and what is the proposal specifically? Why don't people like it?
Yeah, well, the proposal is a very large half-block size footprint on the neighborhood, with 210 units of residential and stores, a very large store, one very large store, which we don't know what will be yet, grocery store, whatever, 35,000
when you say large,
square feet.
you mean the size of a Save on Food and Drug?
Yeah, so 35,000 square feet is a very large store. It'll occupy much of that half-block size footprint. And then there's some other stores, a 10,000 square foot store, so a number of other retail as well on Vancouver Street. And we don't have a problem with the smaller boutique retail in that area. The problem we have is with a large store like that, which will inevitably bring in customers with their cars from the whole region. Right. And we don't think that's appropriate.
Now, one problem is that all the traffic is going to enter the development off of Mason. And Mason is currently a very quiet one-way street with a nice little children's park, which will now be next to an extremely busy street. It's really going to have an impact on the neighborhood, bringing the traffic in off of Mason.
Yes, we have a huge problem with what effectively will happen to Mason Street is that it'll become simply a driveway for this development, for the private development. But the other problem also, of course, is Vancouver Street is a people priority greenway and a bike path. And it's much used by cyclists. and much used by people who, the people priority greenways are to link greenways. They're meant to be, people get the priority on it, not cars. And yet this development will put 300 cars per hour in peak commuter hours onto that street and onto Mason Street, completely throwing both of those streets into car culture streets.
Now, the decision on this is going to be made by our new city council,
yes,
and it's going to be a good indication of how those people relate to the people who they represent. So what can city council do?
Well, what we want city council to do is just reject this proposal and go tell the developer, you either start again and actually engage the community in real discussions, or just go away and let another developer come in. This developer came into the neighborhood originally and said, we have this proposal, do you like it? We said, no, we don't like it. The developer now characterizes their first proposal as prison-like. This is the developer's own characterization of their proposal, their initial proposal, as a prison. And they laugh about that. But the fact is they tried to foist that on the neighborhood. They did some minor tweaks to the development. Instead of a 6-story monolithic block, it's now 7 stories on the Pandora side and 4 stories on Mason Street and 6 stories on Vancouver. But other than that, there's been only very minor tweaks. So we're not happy with the proposal. If council can make them get rid of their 35,000 square foot grocery store, if they can make access happen on Pandora, we're prepared to talk about that.
Thank you, Al. Thanks very much.
Okay.
You know, and once again, the question is who chooses what kind of cities and neighborhoods we're going to have, a developer or the people who live there? Thanks for watching this segment of Citizens Forum. I will be discussing the same issue in the next segment. Welcome back. We're still talking about the same issue, which is a large development planned for near where I live. The plan is by the developer called Bosa, and it's the St. Andrew's School place, the building. Our guest in this segment is Tristan Trotter, and welcome, Tristan.
Thanks.
You have a small store on Mason Street.
That's right.
And Mason Street is right behind this thing and is going to be heavily impacted. Maybe you can once again just set the scene so people will know what we're talking about and where.
Okay, so on one half of the block you have the St. Andrew's School site at Pandora and Vancouver. And right now there's an existing entrance off Pandora to the school site, which has been used for decades. On the east end of the block are Wellburn's shopping market, grocery store, and a small park and children's playground, Franklin Green Park, which draws a lot of families and children all day long. I mean,
and this is an area of town that doesn't have a lot of green space.
Well, actually, we have a couple of major parks, Central Park and Royal Athletic Park in North Park Neighbourhood, and they're sites for festivals and sport activities and so on. But
in my life, that's a completely different part of the city for me. I mean,
yeah.
But this little park, I walk past.
Yeah, it's a little sort of pocket park that.
I mean, for that little neighborhood, it's what there is.
That's right. That's right. And since they put in the new playground equipment a few years ago, it's been attracting people back to the park. Quite often, the kids notice the park from Cook Street and drag their parents down and become frequent visitors.
So you live on Mason Street, and this development is significant. It's not just a building. It's more like a square.
Well, it's not. When people say square, they think of an open space. Yeah. This is more like a gated community. Okay. And you have to keep in mind that the plan is for a podium, which is a technical term about site coverage, that it's the first floor and a half cover almost the entire site. And on top of that floor and a half are two buildings, a 4-story building facing the park and Mason Street, and a higher building facing Vancouver and Pandora.
So the podium that covers the entire site will be the supermarket, etc. And then 2 buildings on top of that.
That's right. And you only enter the site if you're a paying customer or if you're a resident or visitor to the building. Okay, so it's not like an open space. You know, North Park residents were wanting a walkway through the site, perhaps diagonally, that would break it up and prevent one big store from being there, and would also provide a walkway through the site with some green space for any citizen that wanted to walk through it.
Right, but that's not the case.
That's not the case, no. Instead, they're proposing a courtyard for their residents on the 2nd floor level. And in fact, they went to the design review panel with a proposal that included AstroTurf, gardening in planter boxes, and one of the members of the advisory design panel said it's not going to look anything like this, like the artist's rendition of it. Yeah. In fact, they're going to be in deep shade.
Now, Al was saying earlier that the neighborhood is not really supportive of this plan. Mm-hmm. Do you want to comment on that?
Well, for one thing, it's essentially the same plan that Council was discussing a year ago in spring. It hasn't really changed since then. They were to go to public hearing September 11th and said that they were wanting a break to consult with the neighborhood on key issues. Well, they haven't touched on the issues of the big store, all of the traffic coming in on Mason Street, and the desire for more greenery on the site. Instead, they've sort of tossed out a new idea about affordable housing, which no one is going to say no to affordable housing. We're supportive of affordable housing, but this is not social housing or supportive housing. It's 11 units, which represents 5% of the building population. And we feel that our concerns about the big store and the traffic definitely outweigh those considerations that are being put forward as affordable housing.
Is this going to change the neighborhood?
Oh, definitely. And I think it's a bad precedent for the city to basically rezone a site from institutional to mixed use, and without sensitive transition to the neighborhood, and with a traffic plan that will heavily impact an existing greenway and cycle route, and essentially increase the car traffic on Vancouver at Mason by about 37%.
37%?
Yeah, I've looked at the latest study, the CRD and City of Victoria bike and car counts.
Mason has no traffic.
That's right.
How can it only increase it by 37%?
That's 240 cars at the Mason-Vancouver intersection, and 70 cars coming west from Cook Street.
Okay. Now, of course, neighborhoods change, and as you say, some people might want a development on that site. So what's the response to people who just say, yeah, let's do it?
Well, we want a better plan for the site than what's being offered. And it doesn't mean that you go with the first guy who wants to dance with you, okay? They're asking for a rezoning from institutional to mixed use.
Okay, so from the school to what will now
that's
be
right.
housing.
And this is a chance for council to exercise some creativity and vision. It's a test of the official community plan, which, besides talking about increasing density in neighborhoods, also talks about sensitive transition to neighborhoods, greenways, bike routes, all of the warm and fuzzies This offers us none of the warm and fuzzies. It basically takes away our ambient light. It introduces all kinds of traffic problems and noise that we didn't have before. It shuts off the community to the site. And also, what about the impact on local businesses? What about the impact on Welburns? What about the impact on Patisserie Danielle and Wildfire Bakery and some of the Blair Market, some of the smaller businesses that will be duplicated by in-house bakeries and delis and so forth. If they're open 24 hours a day, somebody is going to lose a sale. Because,
is this store going to be open 24 hours a day?
Well, if it's a Thrifties and they're the only ones who have canvassed the neighborhood about whether it would support a big grocer, then, you know, in all likelihood, it could be a 24-hour operation.
So this is a huge impact on what used to be a very quiet residential neighborhood.
Right, right.
And it's, you know, to me it just brings about the question, we all live in neighborhoods. Who makes the decision about what's going to happen to our neighborhoods when a developer comes along? Because all the developer really cares about is maximization of profit, as far as I know.
Exactly. I mean, the developer, Dale Bosa, wrote a letter to the city's Governance and Priorities Committee that said they wanted certainty about the access to the site. And they said that they didn't want it coming in off of Pandora because they wanted the success of the project hinged on uninterrupted storefront on Pandora. So as much as they will point to the city and say the city is forcing us to do this.
You mean to have the traffic all come in off
on
of
Mason Street. It suits them very well to have it come in off of Mason Street because they don't give up anything except the minimum amount of land. If the site access is on Pandora or off of Vancouver, they have to give up the equivalent of 2 lanes to accommodate it, and that's the storefront on top of that 2-lane entrance exit. By piggybacking on the existing one-way of Mason Street, they're only offering the single lane coming into the site, and they're using Mason Street as their exit. So minimum risk for them. And of course they want a big store because the big store will fixture the premises for them and be a long-term tenant that can wait for the city to grow up around it. Meanwhile, wreaking havoc with the local economy.
So that's what's happening in a part of our city. You know, it happens all the time, but we citizens have got to, I mean, look at Vancouver. The same kinds of people who created what I would call a disaster in Vancouver, that's how they make their money, and now they want to make it in Victoria. So yeah, we should all have our eyes on it. Our city council is going to be making this decision. Personally, I don't have that much faith in our city council, but I think, you know, it's up to all of us to keep an eye on what's happening. And of course the media, which, although this is an important story, it doesn't get that much coverage because it's talking about our future. What are we going to be doing with our future? And Tristan, I'd like to thank you as well for the work that you and the Neighbourhood Association and all the people in that neighborhood have done on this. We're almost out of time, but any final thing you'd like to say?
Well, one note is that the earliest a public hearing could be held would be August 27th. So that's a Thursday at 7 p.m. And the other thing is that City Council has the option of dictating the form that a development takes. And Vancouver City Council years ago changed a very similar site that was going to be occupied by a Home Depot and dictated that 2 halves of the site had to be developed in a different manner. It was at Arbutus and Broadway. And the council of the day actually, you know, turned that around and saved the local lumber yards on the west side of Vancouver. And that's what we're asking for too.
Yeah. Tristan, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching this segment of Citizens Forum.